Ada Blackjack, born Ada Molituk, was an Inupiat woman born in 1898 in the settlement of Spruce Creek in the Alaska far north. She grew up away from her Inupiat family, raised by missionaries and taught to sew, speak English, and cook Western foods. She knew little of her community's traditions. After a divorce with her abusive husband, Ada and her son Bennett moved to Nome before she had to leave Bennett with a children's home to care for his tuberculosis. In order to pay for her son's treatment and return, Ada volunteered to join an expedition to the remote island of Wrangel, where she worked as a seamstress for the crew, which consisted only of 4 men and a cat. She was recruited by the explorer Vilhjalmur Stefansson, who offered a salary of $50 a month for her work. The goal for Stefansson was to keep a small colony on Wrangel year-round to prove it could be hospitable. When the expedition departed in September 1921, Ada was only 23 years old. Stefansson had hired other Inuit families to join the expedition, though they ultimately backed out, leaving Ada the only Alaska Native person and the only woman on the crew. When she arrived at Wrangel, Ada was extremely depressed and neglected her work, provoking hostility from the men. Eventually, she settled into her tasks, however, sewing clothes for both herself and the crew. She was taught how to carry out other tasks around the camp alongside the 4 men. Originally, Wrangel Island was a prospective territory for Canada, but the Bolshevik government made an official claim to the island while the expedition was already there. The crew were not made aware of this, and a resupply ship failed to arrive the summer of 1923. The Canadian government was reluctant to continue funding the expedition, so Stefansson had to rely on outside sources to fund the relief ship. It was delayed, and sea ice had already blocked its passage when the ship was finally sent for Wrangel. The crew was undersupplied, as Stefansson believed there would be plentiful game to hunt on Wrangel. There wasn't, and the crew struggled to find food. 3 of the men left the camp with a dog team to find help in Siberia in January, leaving Ada with crew member Lauren Knight, who was ill with scurvy. The party never returned. Ada was tasked with caring for Lauren, sewing, managing the camp, and hunting for food, all while also showing symptoms of scurvy. She taught herself to shoot a rifle and used it to defend the camp from polar bears. She took records almost every day in her journal, writing about her hunting and trapping, her condition, Lauren's condition, her sewing, what animals she saw, the weather conditions, everything. Months after the party had left, Ada still had hope for their return, as she wrote in her journal about sewing gloves for Milton Gall and Fred Moorer, 2 of the men who had left the camp. Tensions were high between Ada and Lauren, as their respective journal entries detailed. Despite his hostility towards her, Ada cared for Lauren until his death in June of 1923, 6 months after the rest of the crew had gone missing. She recorded the date of his death on one of the crew members' typewriters and moved herself to the storage shed, leaving Lauren's body in the shelter. Now on her own, aside from Vic the cat, Ada managed to survive for months on Wrangel Island, hunting and trapping her food, reinforcing her shelter, sewing clothes, and building umiat to hunt seals on the island. On August 20th, 1923, help finally arrived, over a year after the first relief ship failed to come. Ada was rescued, being the sole survivor of the expedition. She returned to Nome, not paid what was promised her, but still took the money in order to gain custody of her son again. Stefansson, despite not being present on the expedition, received much attention and money due to Ada's story, and despite her journal entries being used in his book on the expedition, Ada didn't receive any royalties for it. Ada Blackjack's story is one of perseverance, a mother willing to do anything for her child. Despite being horribly alone, in first identity and then in company, she survived, teaching herself skills she had little knowledge of before. Without Ada, the story of the Wrangel Island expedition would have remained untold, and she stands in history as a heroic Inupiat woman who was able to survive life on an unfamiliar remote island for months. Upon her return, Ada didn't want the attention. She never joined the expedition for fame or excitement. She wanted to move on with her life, and she did. Ada regained custody of Bennett and went on to have another son, Billy, in 1924. She spent a portion of her life in Washington State and then in Alaska, where she remained until her death in 1983.